The question, has science buried God, suggests that there's only one God, like the imaginary best friend believed in by so many theists, which is a misconception. The reality is there are many gods, and science has refuted all of them. Human civilization has historically attributed divine power to a range of gods connected to the sun, the moon, the planets, wind, earth, and oceans. According to some estimates, over 1,000 different gods have been worshipped across human history. Mars, Poseidon, Thor, and many more. The critical point is that most of us no longer believe in any of these gods. In fact, the only difference between these gods and the one remaining god that some still worship is simply a matter of which deity we disagree exists. The reason for the rejection of these other gods is clear. Science has revealed their falseness. Today, if a farmer faces a drought, they don't pray for rain. Instead, they consult meteorologists. This is a direct result of science's ability to prove factual, accurate solutions. As science continues to advance, the power over these ancient beliefs erodes, and we are left with the difficult question of the remaining god's existence. At this point, one might ask how likely it is that the God people continue to believe in is the actual true one, especially considering how many other gods have already been debunked. If we start with an unbiased approach, it's probably very unlikely that all the gods were false, but this one that you believe in is true. However, the key takeaway is that our understanding of the world has evolved over time. Knowledge has advanced since the days of ancient civilizations, where people didn't even know that the Earth orbited the sun. It's only natural that these outdated beliefs have been shown to be incorrect. The teachings passed down from ancient times are based on ignorance, not divine truth. Although there is still much we don't know about the universe, science is not hindered by ignorance. It's constantly evolving. It's irresponsible to halt the search for answers by resorting to the notion that God did it. That is a convenient, lazy explanation that ignores the rigorous, ongoing work of scientists. Moreover, the story of Jesus and the claims of Christianity are not unique when compared to other myths from different cultures. I mean, the story of Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection mirrors many earlier mythologies. Consider Dionysus, for example, the Greek god of wine, who shares strikingly similar traits with Jesus. Both were born of a virgin, fathered by a supreme deity, and performed miracles like turning water into wine. This isn't a singular or unique story. It's part of a pattern that spans many cultures and religions. The resurrection myth, too, isn't exclusive to Christianity. Osiris, one of the major gods of ancient Egypt, was also believed to be resurrected. And in ancient Egyptian religion, anyone could be resurrected by aligning themselves with Osiris. This pattern of resurrection is not unique to the Christian faith. The reason why belief in these gods is waning is not just due to time passing, but because information is now more widely accessible. As people become more informed, they realize that the myths they were taught were not universal truths, but regional beliefs belonging to specific cultures at specific points in time in history. This global access to information is helping to erode religious belief as people see that other people believe in entirely different gods, further weakening the case for the truth of any one religion. Religion in many parts of the world is clearly in decline. In the Western world, the number of people affiliated with religious organizations is steadily decreasing. However, the specific beliefs people hold to are still largely dependent on where they were born. If you were born in the US, you might believe in the Bible and Jesus. If you were born in India, you might adhere to Hindu beliefs. In the Islamic world, you may believe in the Quran and the writings of Muhammad. The truth, however, is that where you were born largely dictates your religious affiliation, which suggests that these beliefs are culturally constructed rather than universally true. The continued decline of religious belief is aided by the availability of information, which allows people to question their inherited beliefs. As people around the world are exposed to different religions and worldviews, the strength of religious doctrines weakens. The decline of religion is driven largely by the fact that more people are learning about the diversity of belief and realizing that their own religion isn't the only valid one, or maybe not valid at all. Science can't disprove most gods outright. Rather, science has effectively refuted the need for God in any meaningful way. Most conceptions of gods cannot be disproven because they are too vague or they're unfalsifiable. However, when we look at the scientific progress of the last 500 years, it's clear that the arguments for God's existence are based on outdated, unsupported beliefs. Science has shown that the universe doesn't require a divine creator. As scientists explore the origin and evolution of the cosmos, it becomes evident that many of our creation myths are simply that, myths. Our understanding of the universe is driven by empirical evidence, and it shows us that claims of the religious are grounded in ignorance. Belief in God may provide comfort, but it's not rational. Science, on the other hand, provides answers based on evidence and reason. Science's understanding of the universe is incompatible with many of the supernatural claims made by religious traditions. For example, some argue that the universe is fine-tuned for life, suggesting that this fine-tuning is evidence of a divine creator. This notion, however, is a misunderstanding of the natural world. Just as earlier beliefs about special creation were debunked by the theory of evolution, the argument that the universe was designed for life falls apart when we consider the vastness of the universe and the many ways in which life could have evolved. It has taken over 200 years of ongoing creativity from some of the brightest minds in history to effectively debunk God. And folks, we could enhance the Bible in a matter of seconds, which raises concern about its claim to be the best book on any subject. I've never believed, nor have I ever argued, that the world's problems or conflicts stem from religion. In fact, I doubt that most wars are driven by religious ideology. The more significant issue is dogmatism, belief without adequate evidence, beliefs that divide people and resist criticism. These beliefs, whether rooted in religion, nationalism, or other ideologies, can create divisions that lead to conflicts. Nationalism, in particular, can be corrosive to the values we aim to promote in a civilized society. The real problem, however, is that only religion cloaks dogmatism in the guise of sanctity, calling it faith. Once it's called faith, it becomes an integral and seemingly redemptive part of the human experience. But I don't think that it is, and I believe we can have ethics and spiritual experiences without relying on insufficient evidence or deceiving ourselves about what we know to be true. Regarding the longing for comfort, it's understandable. Death is a harsh reality, and humans are unique in being able to contemplate their own morality. We are drawn in two opposing directions. One is to avoid the body of a loved one due to fear of disease, while the other is to approach it out of affection. This conflict gives rise to burial rites and the idea that the deceased still exists in some form. And even our minds keep replaying thoughts about him or her. These habits of mind can evolve into a form of hallucinatory presence. Changing gears, the notion that if God is dead, everything is permitted is a myth that has caused a great deal of harm. Atheists who think their lack of belief means that there's no distinction between right and wrong are entirely mistaken. Many religious people make the same error, assuming that without God there can be no morality. But the idea that morality is intrinsically tied to a God is flawed. If even religious people are to be believed, it's not God but self-appointed representatives of God who actually dictate morality. We don't need divine intervention to figure out what is reasonable or moral. Human societies can reason and arrive at moral principles through open, fact-based discussion. The evolution of moral standards like those in the Old Testament shows that morality changes over time, not because God's commands change, but because society's understanding of right and wrong evolves. Finally, human beings are constantly engaged in the process of deciding how to live and what constitutes moral behavior. If an imagined deity helps someone through this process, well, that's a psychological fact, but it doesn't affect the actual moral conversation. A more recent thought that I've had is how some institutions rely on the ignorance of people that they exploit. Religions, for example, have historically thrived in environments where information was difficult to access. For centuries, adherents were often ignorant not only of other religions, but their own beliefs and practices. This ignorance helped maintain religious solidarity and cohesion. How could a divine force allow good people, men, women, and children, many of whom are innocent, who are trying to build a future, to perish in seemingly random occurrences? If I have faith that a ship will reach its destination, I may choose not to check its condition or make sure it's seaworthy. However, in the real world, we know that some ships fail to make it, and we would hold the ship owner accountable for not taking precautions. Faith alone cannot guarantee safety. In fact, blind faith often puts lives at risk. A prime example of this is the Roman Catholic Church's stance against the use of condoms, particularly in regions like sub-Saharan Africa, where the risk of contracting HIV or AIDS is extremely high. This refusal to embrace preventative measures has without a doubt led to the loss of countless lives. Now, regarding the question of creation, I find it simpler to believe that the universe has always existed rather than postulating that it was created by a divine being who has existed forever. This seems like a more straightforward explanation. You might argue that science supports the creationist view, citing the Big Bang, but science only states that the observable universe began approximately 13 billion years ago with a massive expansion. It does not claim that the universe was created by a divine force. Therefore, I argue that there's no compelling reason to believe that the hypothesis of a divine creator is more valid than the idea that the universe has always existed. As for our evolutionary origins, it's well established that we evolved from primates. The question is, do we need to invoke some divine force to explain morality and why we act in the way that we do? Why do some individuals risk their lives to help strangers, even though many others do not? I don't think a transcendental explanation is necessary. Compassion and moral behavior can be understood through our evolution as mammals who needed to care for their offspring and live in small, often kin-based communities. Helping others in these settings helps us ensure the survival of our genes, and this behavior is common among social animals, especially our primate relatives. It's definitely possible to explain heroic acts through evolutionary theories, like the idea of reciprocal altruism, helping others in the expectation that they will help you in return. In evolutionary game theory, the strategy of tit for tat has been shown to be an effective approach in these situations. Now, when it comes to historical evidence, we must approach claims of miraculous events with a high degree of skepticism. There are many who claim to have visitations or visions or experiences, including religious figures like the Apostle Paul. However, such experiences can be explained as personal perceptions or even hallucinations, not objective facts. We see similar claims today about encounters with aliens or other supernatural beings, and we are all rightly skeptical. As for the question of whether religion enhances morality, I argue that in fact it is the opposite. Religion can actually cloud moral judgment. For example, imagine I break into the home of a devout Christian family, torturing them, killing their pets, and then when asked why I did it, I say, well, the devil made me do it. Most people would immediately recognize this as an immoral act. However, when the Bible depicts God causing harm to Job, as in the guy in the book of Job, where God allows the devil to destroy Job's life without cause, many still fail to recognize the moral implications. This inconsistency reveals that religion can sometimes blind people to the moral failings of its sacred figures. Religion can distort our moral perceptions, making us loyal to religious figures even when their actions are morally questionable. Again, in the case of Job, for example, many are reluctant to call God a moral monster despite the apparent injustice to Job and his family. This shows that religious loyalty can obscure our ability to make objective moral judgments. Do you believe that naturalism limits your perspective, potentially preventing you from considering alternative explanations? I don't think it's an assumption at all. Many argue that naturalism starts with the presumption that nothing outside natural laws can exist, but I'm open to alternatives. If a phenomenon were to appear to defy natural laws and align with a religious explanation, I would be willing to entertain that idea. But of course, as a rational skeptic, I would still search for the best explanation. Naturalism often seems simpler to me compared to theism, because naturalism focuses only on the natural world, while theism includes this world of something else, which is not always clearly defined. If I were to approach this in a probabilistic way, naturalism seems to have a higher prior probability than theism, but any overwhelming evidence could change that view. If theism were indeed true, there's no reason why God should be hard to find. He would be easily observable. In contrast, under naturalism, people might believe in God, but evidence would be less apparent. With theism, one would expect religious beliefs to be universal and not limited to one group or particular time. God wouldn't just reveal himself to a small tribe centuries ago in the Middle East. Instead, messages would be for everyone. Under naturalism, however, you'd expect various, even conflicting religious beliefs to arise in different communities over time. But under theism, moral teachings in religion should be clear and universally progressive, such as the belief that slavery or sexism is wrong. Whereas naturalism would allow moral teachings to reflect changing societal views, some of which might be less than enlightened. Sacred texts in theism should reveal scientific insights, such as knowledge about germs or hygiene practices. But under naturalism, sacred texts are more likely to be a mix of useful ideas, myths, and poetry. And again, if theism were true, we would expect life forms to be designed. But under naturalism, they would be the result of natural processes like evolution. Again, under theism, mind should be independent of bodies, whereas naturalism suggests that a person's mental state is closely linked with their physical condition. Again, with theism, one might expect to solve the problem of evil, with suffering being allowed to give us free will. But life should be essentially fair. Naturalism, on the other hand, suggests that life is messy and chaotic. These are the kinds of things that naturalism explains more clearly, and that's why I think it's the more plausible model. As for the historical relationship between the church and science, yes, it's true that the church was historically the major institution supporting education, including science, in medieval times. But that's simply a historical fact and doesn't speak to the validity of science itself. Science has grown up beyond its religious origins and continues to progress because it doesn't assume its answers before asking the questions. Religion, however, has often remained static, asking the same questions without evolving over time. Science is about testing hypotheses, constantly changing in response to new evidence. It's often best when scientists are confused or believe that they are wrong, because science evolves and improves, relying not on human intuition, but on what works, where the evidence leads. And what works survives. What doesn't is discarded. People don't have to trust their initial instincts in science. Scientific intuition, which often contradicts our ordinary intuition, is something that needs to be developed. But above all, we must challenge everything, constantly striving to prove ourselves wrong, because that's how science makes progress. When we hear someone argue for God based on gaps in scientific understanding, it's not an argument for God at all. It's an argument from ignorance, a well-known logical fallacy. The presence of unanswered questions about our universe doesn't prove any God's existence. Science acknowledges that there are still many things we don't know, and it's this uncertainty that drives further inquiry. This is what makes science exciting and dynamic. Ultimately, the process of science isn't just for a small group of experts. It's something that everyone participates in from childhood. We learn by testing, experiencing, and learning from the wonderful world around us. Science should be applied in all aspects of life, including public policy, because it works and makes our lives better. Nature, unlike art, follows rules and provides explanations. It makes predictions which we can test and refine. This is what distinguishes science from religion. Now, when it comes to religion and politics, the two are deeply intertwined. To understand the future of religion, we must also understand the direction of society and politics. I don't envision a future where religion is separate from the broader cultural and political landscape. In conclusion, the argument that science has disproven God is a reflection of the immense progress humanity has made in understanding the natural world through evidence and reason. Over time, science has debunked countless ancient deities, revealing that the myths surrounding them were constructed to explain the unknown. The decline in religious belief today is largely driven by the increasing accessibility of information and the growing awareness that diverse religious beliefs are culturally constructed rather than universally true. While science cannot directly disprove the existence of all divine forces, it has shown that many religious claims, particularly those about creation, morality, and miracles, are not supported by empirical evidence. Instead, they often stem from outdated, superstitious views of the world. The more we learn about the universe, the less plausible the idea of a divine creator becomes, especially given that the universe operates in ways that can be explained by natural processes. And wrapping things up here, morality does not require a divine source. Human societies have developed moral systems based on reason, empathy, and the evolution of social behaviors, not divine commandments. While religion may offer comfort to some, it often obscures objective moral judgment and fosters dogmatism. The idea that faith alone can solve life's mysteries or provide answers to profound questions has led to harm, such as when religious dogma prevents the acceptance of scientific progress or when it distorts moral judgment. Ultimately, science provides a far more reliable means of understanding the world than religious faith. As we continue to explore and understand the universe, we are not bound by the limitations of ancient myths. We are free to embrace a worldview grounded in evidence, reason, and progress, one that encourages continuous questioning and discovery without the need to resort to unfounded beliefs. Science flies you to the moon, and religion flies you into buildings.
And so I'm throwing my entire family heritage away. I'm free. Where's the polyamory and the drugs?